Well, hello and welcome to Bar and Bench's interview series. Today, we have with us the Advocate General of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, Senior Advocate Diwan Chand Raina. Senior Advocate Raina holds the rare distinction of being the Advocate General of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, who also went on to continue and be the first Advocate General of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir post the abolishment of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution. Senior Advocate Rana has spent over 4.5 decades in Jammu and Kashmir handling legal cases and possesses in depth knowledge about the legal affairs of the hilly valleys of Jammu and Kashmir. Today with us, he is going to speak on several issues ranging from AFSPA, UAPA, Uniform Civil Code, his own legal practice, and how the administration of justice has changed from the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Welcome, Senior Advocate Rana, to the Bar and Benches interview series. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So the first question is, you were, the Advocate General of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, and you are the first Advocate General of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. How has been the shift in your role been like?
See, AG's role is well defined in the Constitution. I am required to advise the government, represent the government, plead for the government in accordance with the law. The only difference is that with abrogation of the main provisions of Article 370, so the applicability of the central laws, see, has become applicable to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir.
Right.
Now we have to understand in the constitutional context. Earlier, Article 370 gave a special status, though it was a temporary provision to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, that the temporary status could be termed as a caveat against Chapter 3rd of the Indian Constitution.
Right.
Like you can't buy land here, you can't have a job here, and you can't have other facilities as the other citizens of India would have, see, in other parts of the country. This caveat was through Article 35A,
Okay.
and 35A was issued, you see, by the President of India in exercise of power under 370.
Right.
So that's what it made a difference. Now, the first thing which happened is that on 5th August 2019, the President of India, in concurrence with the uh, with the arrest while, see, state of Jammu and Kashmir, brought amendment to Article 370, 367,
Right.
and then the expression used there as a constituent assembly, because otherwise the Article 370 would not have been made redundant
Correct.
unless the Constituent Assembly would recommend for that. So first amendment was the word Constituent Assembly was replaced with the Legislative Assembly. And because we were already under governor rule, so therefore he had the all those power of the legislature. So therefore concurrence was there. So there it became now the Legislative Assembly. Thereafter, the President of India issued a constitutional application order on 5th August, that is 272. So that, you see, replaced Article 35A, meaning thereby all those barriers which were there, or the kind of a caveat which was there, it has been removed now. Now there is a direct application of all Indian laws, maybe list third, first list, second list, or third list, subject to, of course, Article 246. So the change in role is that I have to now discharge my duties in context to the law which is prevalent now, applicable to the Union Territory Jammu and Kashmir.
Correct.
So therefore, one can't say major change, but there is a change. Of course, those the earlier constitution of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir is not there now. So therefore, it is in tune with the laws which are prevalent in the rest of the country.
Right. 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 So, just to have a quick backdrop with you, because I think you are one of the very few advocate generals we have in our country on whom very less information is available on Google or Wikipedia. So just to enlighten our viewers a bit, so how did you start your legal career, and was law always the first choice?
Uh, See, I did my graduation uh, from Jammu, this GGM Science College, and law, of course, was a preference. But in the given set of circumstances, I just wanted to go in the higher arena of the education. So incidentally, my merit was not that higher, to bag, other disciplines. So incidentally, it matched with the criteria which was fixed for LLB. So this is how you can say the luck has been brought me there. And of course, there was some kind of preference. So I did my LLB from University of Jammu. Uh, I joined the practice bar in 1975, and thereafter, within few years, as the luck would be on my side, so I was put on the panel of the Advocate General there. So that's why I got a huge exposure and represented almost every wing of the government, before the High Court and other courts. And thereafter, now I have put in more than 4.5 decade of my uh, professional service. So this is my practically fourth tenure. Uh, 2008 I was there, 16 I was there, 18 I was here as Advocate General of the state, and in 19, I was the first UT Advocate General. So I have a very humble background, and I practice in every branch of law, maybe taxation, maybe civil law, maybe criminal law, maybe arbitration, maybe corporate. But I got the opportunity to almost to render my service in all segments. Only on criminal side, I was not much interested and I didn't contribute more. But now as a AG, I'm supposed to perform and render my services the best I can do. So this is how it's there.
Sir, Jammu and Kashmir has been in the news lately for invoking the provisions of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Um, do you think the law is needed at this moment in time, drawing experience from your legal career, which expands over 4 decades? And how do you think is the general public reacting to the applicability of UAPA, which was not applicable to it when it was not a union territory? Or if you could say the prior to abolishment of Article 370?
One needs to understand and appreciate that the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, now Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, has been constantly under threat of militancy, intrusion, invasion, and all kinds of things which would disturb the peace and tranquility of the Union Territory.
Right.
Now, for keeping the peace, tranquility, and moving further in all segments of life, it has become necessary, it is necessary that some laws must always be there. You see a lot of pieces here. Otherwise, you would find every Friday or every now and then the stone pelting and lot of other things were there. Now
Correct.
you come to the valley, you will find things are absolutely fine and moving. Of course, stray incidents of militancy are there, and time will take its own course. But in the given set of circumstances, right at this point of time, I don't think there's any bad in having that law, unlawful activity
Right.
act.
So even though in July this year, the Jammu and Kashmir High Court had stayed the appointment of a certain law officers, it was only your post which was not stayed, as in it had a green signal from the High Court. I wanted to ask you on a personal level, what is the source or the continued source of trust that the government reposes on your abilities to discharge the duty as the Advocate General of the state and now the UT?
See, it has to be seen in different contexts.
Right.
The High Court of Jammu and Kashmir, she stayed the appointment of the government law officers on the ground of certain conditions and the clauses in the criteria which we had inserted. And court was viewing only in that context, that issue. Then I took the matter before the division bench and said this is absolutely the prerogative of the state, of course, to appoint people in a very transparent manner. But who should be appointed, how he should be appointed,
Correct.
That should be left to the wisdom of the government.
Right.
The division bench agreed with my submissions and stayed that order, and therefore made this process. So far as keeping my post aside, there are two aspects. See, Advocate General post is not filled on account of applications or the competition or something like that.
Right.
The court was only examining that aspect of the matter,
Right.
and knowingly that I am holding a constitutional position. It's absolutely on the basis of a doctrine of pleasure.
Okay.
So therefore, of course, there may be some other feelings that with kind of experience I'm having, but that's another fact. But the fact actually remains is that the post of Advocate General is a post which is based upon the doctrine of pleasure. So therefore, there the intervention may not be that much warranted when the government is satisfied.
Right. Right. You
Yes.
had informed the High Court about 100 prosecution sanctions, which
Yes.
were granted to the CBI and other investigating agencies against government functionaries of the Union Territory in the
Right,
last
right.
3 years. The question is, sir, do you think the accountability in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir is more for public servants, especially compared to the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir?
Yes. Now, the first difference is that we have Director General of Prosecution, which earlier was not.
Right.
We have ACB, that is the Anti-Corruption Bureau. Two things are there.
Right.
And above all, we have the General Administration Department.
Right.
Now, when these three departments have started coordinating with each other, the pace of the sanctions and accountability has many-fold increased.
Okay.
Earlier, what would happen? There would be recommendations, they remain pending for so many reasons, or there may be queries, they'll be sent back and it will take a year together. Now, with this new setup, the amount of accountability with the transparency has increased manifold. So this case is coming up on Wednesday once again, and we will be informing the court about the progress. Now, earlier, this 2021 and 2020, the highest number of sanctions and a number of cases, they are launched in the court. So my simple response to your query is, yes, there is definitely a change with coming into force of the provision of the Constitution of India directly applicable to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, the credit goes to the Lieutenant Governor who monitors himself. Any case of dereliction of duties, people who are deadwood, people who are inefficient, who don't perform, they are regularly being monitored, which has not been in the past because, as you know,
Okay.
I'm there for the last so many decades,
Right.
at least as a member of the society. So therefore, the amount of accountability has certainly increased.
Right, sir. So many sections of the society, I'm sure you are also aware of the entire debate that is brewing now, have called for the repeal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which empowers the security forces to act with impunity in regions it seems disturbed. So what is your take as a legal practitioner towards the continuance of this act in Jammu and Kashmir? And does the benefits of having this legislation in operation override the concerns being raised?
See, first of all, the issues directly or indirectly are before the Supreme Court now,
Right.
because there are few matters. Again, see, where the FIR were lodged against the army personals, and they approached the Supreme Court. Then there are a number of petitions filed there. So I have been also there. So the validity of few provisions of that act is under consideration. So therefore, it will not be proper to go beyond that. But in the given set of situation and circumstances, so such kind of law was necessary. Now, how long it can continue will depend upon the improvement in the situation. Of course, the law which the Supreme Court may like to settle.
Correctly, sir. So, as a senior member of the bar and a senior most law officer of the state, how do you see the human rights situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and how can it be improved? So far as to say, sir, reports that primarily what the public in India reads is that suggests targeted killing of civilians, including members of minority communities, etc., continuing unabated. I'm sure you are also privy to all those reports since these are all in public domain. Do you think the situation of human rights violations, for us to say, has improved in the valley? Or what is, according to you, would be the needed steps to take in this regard?
See, right from 2010 onward,
Right,
and up to 2019, just see the graph. How much violence has been there? What was the situation there? And with coming into force of the Reorganization Act and the restful state becoming Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, I simply put it to you, just see, did you hear any news of stone pelting? Did you hear any news of lathi charge? Did you hear that, you see, violence on the mob? So to a greater extent, see, the problem of human rights violation has been settled and things are improving. We are more than sure that things will certainly improve in the coming times to come. So the concern so far as the people is concerned, we have National Human Rights Commission, we have the high courts, we have other things. So therefore, there's a checks and counter checks. Right. It's not like this, the things go unabated or unchecked. Even the government also ensures that no human right violations take place. And still, I can say there's a lot and huge improvement now with coming into force of this Reorganization Act.
All right. Okay. So you had recently remarked that India has the most flexible constitution, and that has preserved the sensitivities of all people in this nation.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on this for us?
See, I will just let you know that the flexible constitution is because of many factors. Because the Constituent Assembly, when you see, nominated a committee for drafting the constitution headed by B.R. Ambedkar, it took into consideration not only one aspect, it examined, you see, for example, from UK, we got the parliamentary form of government, idea of rule of law, institution of speaker and his role, law-making procedure, concept of procedure established by law, a president as ceremonial head. All fundamental rights and other things we got from UK. Just see a country like Ireland, country like Japan. We are just, see, you'll be happy to know that from Ireland, we had, see, the directive principles. And something which was left, we got from Russia, fundamental duties.
Correct.
So when all these things were there, the purpose was it should be organic in character.
Okay.
It should be ever evolving.
Okay.
It should meet the need of the society from time to time.
Correct.
There should not be rigidity. We all know there are 105 amendments up to date. And from 1950 till date, if there are 105 amendments to the Constitution, you can very well understand there's no question of rigidity. It lives according to the need of the persons, and it solves the problems. Because the context is in which I said it's flexible. I said that it meets the aspiration of the people.
Okay.
Right from bottom to top.
Right.
So that is what the best constitution we have got. And that's why it's very flexible and it's subject to all interpretations.
Right. Right. So what is your take? It's a very direct question. What is your take on a uniform civil code? There has been an on and off demand from several quarters about having a UCC in the country. Do you think the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, UCC is something which would melt well amongst the general public? And if at all it is needed, or is it needed in this time and space?
It's a very vexed question. It carries with it a lot of implications, inherent difficulties, and it need to be discussed at grassroots level, at higher level. Only when a consensus is there, then is possible to have a uniform civil code. So therefore, though in the your fundamental in these directive principles, we also say like that.
Yes.
But it must be in consonance with the wishes, the choice, the willingness of the people at large. So right now, it's very difficult to comment that should not be there. It should be left to the time to come.
No, just probing a little deeper, sir, what are the inherent difficulties that you as a legal professional envisage in having UCC in place?
See, there are difficulties because it's a heterogeneous society.
Right.
And there are many communities which have their own rules, procedure, practice, faith, religion. So for reconciling, to bring everything in a civil code, it's little difficult, at least in the given set of circumstances.
Right.
So it should be a question which should be left open for the times to come.
Right. Sir, the aspect of external threat, whether from Pakistan or neighboring countries, has time and again been cited in Jammu and Kashmir. Do you think it continues the same way even now?
See, there has been hostile intentions of the countries touching and bordering the state. The challenges are there. Invasion, kind of intrusions is there. So it's a bone of contention for so many reasons. So challenges were there, these are still there. And this is how the defense forces of this country have been able to maintain and contain, the situation in a way that peacefully everything is going fine. But challenges, inherent challenges are always there. You can't say these are overruled. We know the hostility of the neighboring countries, especially these two countries, we know that.
So though petitions challenging the constitutionality of the abolishment of Article 370 continues to remain pending before the Supreme Court, do you think it's too late to turn back the clock?
I think as a lawyer and as a law officer, my belief is that the issues which are sub judice before the apex court. So, and I being in a position of Advocate General, should not make any.
I understand.
So,
absolutely.
Because it may not amount to overreaching or prejudging or forestalling something.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's better we leave it to the court. Court is already seized of it.
So, how have you as a legal professional adopted to the transition from physical to virtual courts? Has it been an easy process? Do you see certain changes which should be made in the current virtual hearing process that we have adopted to?
See, virtual thing had certain advantages, there's no doubt, but it also carried with a lot of difficulties. It depends upon the place where you are living. We have very hilly terrains, far-flung areas, inaccessible roads, and kind of a poverty, illiteracy, so far as the Union Territory Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. Therefore, things which need to be noticed are that unless these facilities are available in all district headquarters, in blocks, in zones, and people have access, and then and there, its purpose can be said to be useful. So far as the virtual mode is concerned, it kept the system alive. It never came to grinding halt, because judiciary is one area where things must keep moving, and the people must continue to have their recurring faith and trust.
Right.
That's what the benefit of the virtual mode is. It has certainly helped certain persons. It has been very difficult for the people at the threshold, mediocres, to have that access. And of course, practically, you see, the physical hearing gives more satisfaction to the litigant, clients, people. Therefore, it will take more time in places like Jammu and Kashmir if it has to be virtual. So it's a mixed, I can say it's a mixed response.
Right.
Things have moved, wonderful things. There are a lot of decision judgments rendered by the court even during that time. That shows that there is a vibrancy, there is a dynamism in the system which has kept it alive. That's of course the benefit.
So the High Court has recently ruled in Jammu and Kashmir that even a man, right, can raise the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act in court in his own defense when he's being tortured by the wife. Do you see such an interpretation holding ground if the judgment is appealed?
See, when you see the act itself, the primary purpose is that there has to be peace, no violence, no torture. Now, it can't be that you only say for one side, the act is motivated, or act is dedicated, or act is devoted only to one, gender or sex. So therefore, the court has given a liberal interpretation.
Right.
In a context, suppose the wife pleads that she is being tortured. The husband has a right to say, no, I'm not torturing is one thing. I'm being tortured. So if the circumstances are there, the law has to be liberally interpreted.
Okay. Okay. So just one last legal question before we go to the last question of the interview. So time and again, there is one issue that has been raked in the state of Jammu and Kashmir is the aspect of internet suspension, right? And whenever there is certain amount of militancy or certain external threats, the one thing that's first done is that there's a shutdown of internet in those particular areas. But somehow a question is always raised in the top court that the fundamental right of individuals are being infringed when there is right to internet is taken away. How do you see this entire situation?
We both, you see, as a student of law, are aware that Article 19, no doubt guarantees, we see, the basic fundamental rights. Then we go to Article 21 also.
Right.
But the primary thing to be noticed is that all these rights are subject to reasonable restrictions.
Right.
The level of reasonableness depends upon the set of circumstances, the situations.
Correct.
And area or a portion or a district or a territory which is replete with militancy and this fake news kind of things, when circulated, disturb more and more.
Right.
So therefore, the matter even went to Supreme Court. The committee was there. Even it never said that you cannot do that. They say yes, of course, subject to reasonable restrictions. So all what has happened was even the given set of circumstances,
right,
that to a possible limit, not without reasoning.
Right.
But now, see, there's nothing like this. Things have almost come to the normalcy, and it's moving like anything.
So in your long legal career, which cases are the most close to your heart?
The cases, you see, where the basic rights of the people are taken away and they have to strive and cherish to seek justice. And if one is able to see that justice is given to them, a person is deprived of a property, a person is unnecessarily thrown out of his job, a person, you see, is victimized, you see, and is suffering only because of certain things which have no place in a civilized society like this.
Right.
If the justice gets restored, then it's a great satisfaction that you are serving the society by helping all poor, downtrodden, and deserving people. So to my heart always is the restoration or upholding of the basic fundamental rights. That's what I feel.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on this interview today. And it's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
Is this side also?
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon.